Hello and welcome to Under the Lights, the boxing talk show brought to you by Sportology TV. Today I'm just going to be starting off with some boxing news that has been breaking over the last few days. So the first one is a fight announcement, a heavyweight fight, Joseph Parker versus Junior Farr has been announced. It's going to be on the 11th of December in New Zealand. There's been quite a lot of talk of this fight over lockdown. We caught up with Joe a few weeks ago about the possibility of this fight. He was discussing that, you know, if he wanted it, if it was going to happen. Make sure you check that video out. We'll leave a link somewhere so you can see that. But that fight is confirmed 11th of December. Another heavyweight fight that has been announced, I think the news broke last night, Daniel Dubois versus Joe Joyce. It was meant to happen back in April, and then I think it's meant to happen in the summer. Frank Warren said he didn't want it to happen behind closed doors, but it is going to be behind closed doors on November 28th. The fight is confirmed. Frank has given a statement saying, "With boxing still behind closed doors and struggling to get back on its feet post-lockdown, I wanted to give something of a gift back to the British boxing fans." So that fight is happening. It's not on pay-per-view, so it is going to be live on BT Sport so everyone can enjoy it. It's going to be happening behind closed doors, a huge British heavyweight fight. So that is November 28th, live on BT Sport. Just looking ahead to this weekend, the Frank Warren show, Dennis McCann was meant to be fighting on the card, but he is now no longer fighting. No opponent has come forward to fight him. So he's announced he's actually not fighting this weekend. So we're going to have to wait a little bit longer until we see what is next for that exciting young fighter. And finally, some good news for UK boxing fans. We are going to be able to watch the Lomachenko-Lopez fight. A broadcaster has been found. Fight TV is an online platform, and they are showing the fight. It's going to be pay-per-view for $9.99. So UK fans will be able to get it, and they will be able to see all the action. Next up, Ouney and I were joined by the main man at Boxing Social, Rob Tebbutt, to discuss the results of last weekend's boxing and looking ahead to this weekend's Frank Warren card, where Liam Williams is headlining. And we also discussed loads more upcoming fights. So check it out.
Guys, welcome to Under the Lights, the boxing talk show powered by Sportology TV. And this week, we have none other than someone I've known for a long time, somebody who's a friend of mine, somebody I call a friend of mine, somebody who we've worked together in the past and we've done a good job of it as well. But now he's leading the way on the YouTube scene, doing his thing for Boxing Social, making Boxing Social into one of the biggest platforms around. None other than Rob Tebbutt. Rob, how's it going, mate?
I'm very well, thanks, mate. Thanks. That's quite an introduction. Not sure I quite warranted that, but thanks very much. Always a pleasure to catch up with you and a pleasure to meet you for the first time, Ellie.
And you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm all right. I don't know. This whole year's been a little bit different, to say the least. Shows are now kind of sort of back, been back for a little while now, and it's kind of, I don't know, while there were no shows, we were complaining that things were quiet, and then when shows came back in like a big cluster, now we're all tired again. So careful what you wish for, but would certainly prefer it this way than what it was like when there was no shows. So yeah, but apart from that, all good. Looking forward to, hopefully, a very, very busy and productive end of the year.
Rob, I just want to quickly, before I talk about the boxing and do a bit of a recap on the weekend's boxing that's gone, I want to talk about yourself, because obviously me and you have known each other since the early days of you entering into the boxing scene. You then left, obviously, behind the gloves, went to Boxing Social, and from there you become this director and you're sort of pushing out good content, great social media posts and everything else. Just talk to me about your sort of growth in the whole boxing industry and what you've become and what you were before.
Well, first of all, that was a very modest of you there, Mr. Un Abbas Hussein, because we haven't just worked together since I started to come into boxing. You're actually the first person to give me a job in any kind of form in boxing, whether it's part-time as a contributor or anything. So shout out to you. Thanks very much for that. Still very grateful after all of this time. But yeah, no, I mean, going back to kind of the early days of me and you getting to know each other, it was, I'd spend hours and hours and hours kind of on Facebook boxing forums or various forums, just trawling and talking about boxing, really, like really good conversations. I know like sometimes forums can get a little bit of a bad rep because you just have people who, like me, were kind of sitting around during the day just arguing about boxing. But if you kind of trawl through them, you do get some good ones. And yeah, that's kind of how we met. I remember you asking me about doing just a little bit of writing and kind of starting that way. And just like anybody, I think if you're a big boxing fan, as I've been since I was very young, and you get that initial taste of the industry, it just lights something in you. And then after that, it's just kind of straight ahead and full forward. And that was kind of it. I started doing fight reports, and then I started to interview fighters on the phone, and then would start to go to press conferences, and then it just kind of snowballed from there, really. But yeah, I think if you've got it in you as a boxing fan, once you get that initial exposure to the industry, it just takes you. And that's essentially what happened to me. We didn't actually work together for that long. Once I came on board, you went off to Fight Hype, and then just kind of worked. Really, it was just such a blur those initial months, and then I took a couple of months out to sort of take stock and recover, and I think like everybody who works full time in boxing needs a little bit of a break along the way, just to take a little bit of time out to kind of assess the situation, so to speak. It does take up an awful lot of your time and your brain space. And then came back with Boxing Social, which was a developing platform at the time. They had a vision of what they wanted to do, but I think it's probably fair to say at the time they didn't really have the resources or the infrastructure to make that happen, which is where I felt that I was able to come in, and we've kind of gone from strength to strength, really. I mean, we built a platform from essentially the ground up on YouTube in particular. They'd done some great work on Facebook before I'd got there, and it's just essentially been trying to keep the ball rolling, and obviously the last 6 months, we kind of came into the pandemic on the back of like Joshua Ruiz 2, Wilder Fury 2, like even Andrade Keeler at the start of the year was really good for us because we had the YouTube fight on the undercard, and we kind of like rolled into things with such momentum, and then everything ground to a halt. So yeah, that's kind of a loose outline a little bit of kind of certainly how we got to know each other at the start. And you don't really think about it. I think only in the last couple of days, we've taken on a couple of new starters, taken on Shane Dyer, formerly of Queensbury Promotions, full time. And we've also taken on another couple of writers from the now closed Boxing Monthly. Sean Brown has come into our editorial team. And it was only kind of when you kind of announcing these things that you really actually look at it and go, oh, well, when we started, it was just me. And, we're now adding to the team, and the platform's growing. And to be fair, I think that's kind of the way to go about things. I don't think it's good to be patting yourself on the back every 5 minutes, but probably once every 6 months when you do take stock and look at things. It's been great to see where we've come from, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity from yourself in the initial phase. And who knows what would have happened, Oon, if you never gave me that call. Maybe Boxing Social would be no more. Who knows? So
mate, to be honest, the reason why I think you've done so well is you've just worked hard, man. I've known you for a long time. One thing you've got as a characteristic, as a trait, you're just a hardworking guy. You've worked out for yourself, and well done. But let's talk about boxing. That's enough Rob Tebbutt talk. Let's talk boxing, man, because you talk boxing for a living. You know a lot about boxing. But let's talk about the weekend that's gone. I just want to do a little recap. Someone that you know quite well, someone you've interviewed numerous times and built up this personal relationship with, is Joshua Buatsi. I've seen you go to his gym. I've seen you meet up with him for coffee and whatever else. Let's talk about his performance. Marko Calic, he had 400 days out, Buatsi did. Looked a bit rusty at times. Looked like, he was dusting off a bit of the cobwebs at the start. But give me your assessment on his performance on the night.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have to factor in the fact that there has been a layoff. Sparring, whether you're in this country or abroad, has not been ideal for any fighter. But that being said, I think when you have the reputation of Josh Buatsi and you have the natural skill set that he has, everybody can see the ceiling that he's got. You have to measure him on that, and measuring him on that against an unheralded opponent in Marko Calic. All right, okay, I think a lot of people potentially overlooked him, but that being said, measuring Josh on what we expect from him, what we need to see from him at this stage of his career, I thought it was a very disappointing performance. I thought that a lot of the things that we've kind of grown accustomed to seeing from Joshua Buatsi just weren't really there on the night. I think he was easy to hit. I don't think he made the necessary adjustments, as and when required. I think he was easy to hit with the right hand from distance for a long time, for large portions of the early rounds of the fight. That would be a concern and something that would have to be worked on and looked at in camp. again, going back to, the inactivity and the time away from the ring, that's obviously not going to help. But now Josh is at the stage of his career where he's not a prospect anymore. We kind of spoke about this on our podcast.
Yeah.
And, where do you draw the line with somebody as a prospect? You've got Olympic champions or decorated amateurs, which Joshua was, coming over and getting through, or Lomachenko winning a world title in his third fight, or the process is getting a lot quicker now. Whereas with Josh, he has stalled, not necessarily for any fault of his own. He had the Blake Caparello fight fallout, but a year out of the ring at this stage is not ideal. But particularly when Josh has this high ceiling that everybody knows about, which is always going to get him through a Marko Calic. He's naturally tougher. Naturally will always get him through a Marko Calic. But as he goes up the levels, that's not going to be the case. He's going to need to, he was attacking in straight lines. Everything was straight lines. Attacking in straight lines, defending in straight lines. Didn't slip a shot. It was very much just catch. It reminded me at times of when Anthony Joshua boxed Andy Ruiz, when he was getting hit and the hands were coming up and he was just going back in straight lines. Now, again, against the Marko Calic, your natural ability will kind of get you through those, his natural toughness. He had to show a lot in that fight, which is obviously a positive. We know that he can bite down on the gum shield. We know that he can get through those crisis moments, because there was a couple of moments in, I think, the second round when he initially got hurt to the eye, where it looked as though, there was certainly potential for Marko Calic to really get on top, and he did fight through that. So that's obviously a positive. But looking at Josh's career, I mean, I'm not John Dennon or Chris Lloyd. I haven't seen every one of his amateur fights, but I've seen enough of him as an amateur and also seen him as a professional to know that what we saw on Saturday night really isn't what we should be seeing from Joshua Buatsi, time out of the ring or not. Now, it's, a well sort of said saying where people say, you will learn a lot from fights like that, which is true, but you have to be, it's not like that happens naturally just from getting through the fight. He needs to, and I'm sure he will. Josh is a very bright, very self-aware and very critical person, a very critical fighter of himself. He needs to now go away and have a look at what's been working for him in camp, what's been working for him, what does he need to change, what has he neglected from 2 or 3 fights ago. His last fight against Ryan Ford was an electrifying performance. Before that, I think it was Marco Antonio Periban on the Joshua Ruiz undercard. Again, kind of laboured at times in there. So it's difficult. And, if it sounds like I'm being harsh on Josh, it's because I do rate him extremely highly. And I do feel that now is the time for him. If there are changes that he needs to make or things that he needs to change or tweak, he really has to do them now. We're talking about kind of your Sullivan Barreras and your Jesse Harts and Blake Caparellos. Once you're at that level, you want to be doing, you want to be doing your learning up to those fights. You don't really want to still be learning and be thrown in with a Dimitri Bivol or an Artur Beterbiev or even a Callum Johnson. Callum Johnson on that performance at the weekend, in my opinion, would be a favourite against that version of Joshua Buatsi. So, yeah, a lot to work on for Buatsi, which I'm sure he will. But, yeah, not a great performance at all.
What do you think is next for him? Like, what do you think is... You almost feel like, because he's had so long out of the ring and he was a bit sort of rusty, do you think that he needs to take on another sort of safe fight as such? Or is he going to have to start pushing on now? As you say, time is ticking for him.
Yeah, I think the plan is to get him out on the Joshua undercard in December, which I think is perfect. Like, timing-wise, that's great. He's not out of the ring for too long. But again, it kind of goes back to what's he doing in between fights now. Now, obviously, I'm not privy to an awful lot of his training camp and what he's been working on in the gym. But I think that's probably just as important, if not more important, than getting out in December, is kind of assessing what led to this performance at the weekend. Ring rust is obviously, is obviously a real thing, and it affects different fighters in different ways. But not to say that it's not the cause of it, but I think it's a very easy thing to say. You can say, oh, well, he was rusty, let's get him out again, and he'll learn from that fight and we'll box in December. Like, he may well do that. He may well fight a Sullivan Barrera or Blake Caparello, and kind of, as I've said, like, his natural ability, his natural strength, his power, he's tough. and he really is an animal when he gets into the ring, they will probably get him through a Sullivan Barrera. But is he learning? Is he getting the right progression? Is he getting the right development in these fights that he needs for when he eventually gets to a Bivol or a Beterbiev or somebody like that? So yeah, I mean, I would still like to see Sullivan Barrera or somebody around that kind of level for December, but I think it's very, very important, and I'm sure he will, that Josh goes back and looks at not just the fight, but the training camp. Was there anything that he needs to change? Is there anything that he feels that he's potentially neglected? I think that's probably just as important as getting back into the ring quickly.
Cool. I want to talk about Chantelle Cameron, someone that you've interviewed many a times in the past. I know you're very close to the Shane McGuigan gym, and when she was part of that gym, you interviewed her a few times. Yeah. Now with Jamie Moore, WBC champion on the weekend. First of all, let's talk about her opponent. What did you make of the problem with women's boxing at the moment? Seems to be that because of the depth, there isn't much depth in women's boxing. So when a fight like this happens and then you get an opponent like that, there is question marks, and these questions keep coming again and again and again. What did you make of the level of opposition that she faced?
Well, I mean, I can't sit here and profess to be like a massive expert on Araujo's career to date. I know that she was an Olympic medalist and she had a number of amateur fights, was very experienced, but I think I tweeted something on the night that she looked like a fighter who was coming to get paid. Like, she was 5 pounds overweight. Now, was that an injury in camp? Was she, we don't really know. Did she deliberately kind of blow? Because sometimes a fighter will deliberately blow the weight because it will give them a better chance of winning. They're not necessarily bothered about the belt. I don't necessarily think that was the case. I think it was just a poor camp. And she turned up out of shape and boxed like somebody who didn't really have much of a plan. She kind of fiddled around. You could tell that she kind of knew her way around the ring, but she clearly wasn't in shape. She didn't have any ambition, and it's difficult to look good against somebody like that, who is just coming to kind of fiddle around, not get knocked out ideally, and then take her paycheck and run home. And I feel like that's what we saw from Araujo this past weekend. And it is disappointing because female boxing is riding this crest of this wave. We saw Fight Camp with Courtney Ball. We saw Taylor versus Bassoon 2, Terry Harper, Tasha Jonas. We saw Jess McCaskill against Cecilia Breakhouse recently. So, like, women's boxing is in as good a place, or has as much momentum as it's had certainly in recent years. Probably have to go back to like the days of Ann Wolfe and stuff like that, but even still, so we didn't get, a barn burner of a performance. But I think Chantelle boxed well. I think I know Chantelle well enough to know that she'll be very disappointed not to get the stoppage. She can really punch, which is what I think that women's boxing has been kind of missing. When Ronda Rousey was kind of shooting up in the UFC. I mean, Oon will know that I'm not an MMA or UFC guy, but she was getting there because she was knocking people out, and it was bringing excitement, and it was something new and exciting, and we haven't really had that in women's boxing so far. You kind of look at Clarissa Shields, excellent, outstanding amateur, not really had that much as a professional as in ways of a test. I know she's very, very accomplished, but going back to the depth, a lot of it is vacant titles or kind of she's fighting women or fighting fighters who shouldn't really be in the ring with her, but that again comes back to the depth. But back to kind of Chantelle Cameron, because I don't want to waste too much time on Araujo's performance because she wasn't that bothered by it, so I'm not going to be. So Chantelle Cameron, I thought, boxed well. I think she stuck to a game plan. I felt like later on in the fight, maybe if she'd have put the foot down a little bit more, she could have got the stoppage. But, you've won every round in a world title fight. There's no real need to go out there and risk a stoppage when you've won every round. So I think there's certainly more to come from Chantelle Cameron. And, Katie Taylor, that fight at 140 pounds would be a massive fight. There's Jess McCaskill at 147, but kind of, again, indicative of the depth or the lack of depth, if you will, in female boxing, is that a lot of the fighters can really kind of go up and down the weights. I mean, you've seen the Serrano sisters. 1 week she's a middleweight, the next week she's a bantamweight, and it's like, it's crazy, So there's a lot of good fights in there, and I think Chantelle will be involved in some really, really exciting fights. I'd love to see her box Delphine Persoon. I think as a style matchup, that's an unbelievable fight. I think the way to beat Delphine Persoon clinically and clearly, which we didn't really see from Katie Taylor, she got 2 very, very close and in some instances, controversial decisions. I think the way to stop a Delphine Persoon is to hit her hard and stop her coming forward. But Katie's not necessarily that type of fighter, whereas Chantelle is. You know, she's got heavy hands. She's spiteful. She's nasty when she gets into the ring. So I think that would be a really, really great fight that I'd like to see somewhere down the line for Chantelle Cameron.
Chantelle said that she's keen for the Katie Taylor fight. If that actually happens soon, how do you see it going? Because they are completely different styles of fighters, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly, and that's why it is such a great fight, because you've got Katie's, you know, extensive amateur background and pedigree and skill set against Chantelle, who, while still, you know, Chantelle was a good amateur herself. You know, she didn't receive the acclaim or necessarily get the medal haul, obviously, that Katie Taylor had as an amateur, but she can box as well. She's not just a brutal banger. I think physically she'll be bigger than Katie Taylor, and I do wonder if, you know, we're now at the stage of Katie Taylor's career where, you know, she's had this extensive amateur background. That's a lot of fights, a lot of wear and tear on the body. And as a professional, I mean, you know, it's easy to talk about the depth or the lack of depth in female boxing, but, you know, Katie Taylor's made no secret of the fact that she's wanted to box the best fighters in the world as soon as possible. And she really has kind of gone after it as a fighter. Whatever you think of the first Delphine Pursoon fight or even the rematch, she's consistently tried to challenge herself. But, you know, the flip side of doing that is she's now, I think she's late 30s, and she's getting to the age where that type of wear and tear is going to start to show. So I wonder if, you know, that fight happens, whether the natural size and the punching power and the freshness of Chantelle Cameron might just be a little bit too much for Katie Taylor. But I don't think that's something that you can really put your hat on before the fight happens, because Katie would be, you know, by far and away the best fighter that Chantelle Cameron has boxed as a professional. I mean, you look at Katie Taylor's record. She boxed Jess McCaskill, who's obviously just beaten Cecilia Breakhouse, now the undisputed welterweight champion. She boxed Jess McCaskill after a handful of fights at York Hall, you know, and that on the way up, having those fights, and then the two Pursoon fights on the back of that. And, you know, we have seen Katie Taylor be hit, and we have seen her be pushed back, because she's doesn't appear to be the biggest puncher. So that makes that fight really, really interesting. As far as kind of picking a winner, I think it's difficult. I think if I had to, I think I would probably back the freshness of Chantelle Cameron.
Interesting. Let's go over to the States. This weekend, we probably saw one of the craziest fights this year in 2020. Zepeda versus Ivan Baranchyk. We knew Baranchyk was that sort of fighter, come forward, no nonsense, just destroy mode type of fighter. But mate, 8 knockdowns in 5 rounds. It was absolute carnage. Just talk to me about that. That was just, first of all, I want to say we're glad that Ivan Baranchyk is fine. You know, he's come out of hospital. He put up a picture with his manager and everything else, and he seems to be fine, which is good, because after seeing him on the floor for so long, it was a bit of a worrying thing. But Rob, let's talk about that craziness that happened on the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it was some fight, wasn't it? I mean, when it first got announced, it was one of the fights I was most looking forward to, because you kind of knew that stylistically they were just going to kind of go like that. Like, Baranchyk is a caveman, come forward, letting the big shots go from the opening round. Whereas Zepeda is a lot trickier, a lot cuter. I watched him box Jose Pedraza on the Fury Wallin undercard, I think, not too long ago. I was very impressed with him. You know, I kept a keen eye on him. I watched the Jose Ramirez fight, which was a very close fight, and you kind of knew that they were gonna mix really well. I thought that stylistically that was a brilliant fight to make, but I didn't expect that. Like, I really didn't expect that. I thought Zepeda would probably be wary of the power, maybe try and, you know, fiddle around and outbox him on the back foot. I actually backed Baranchyk to win the fight, because while, you know, Zepeda is a great boxer and he's very technical and he's got a lot of skill, although he's got a lot of knockouts on his record, I just didn't know whether or not he'd have enough to deter Ivan Baranchyk. And, you know, we saw Baranchyk come out of the gates, score the early knockdowns, and you just kind of thought, okay, well, this is only going to go one way, and then it went the other way, and then it went back, and then the other way. It was a brilliant fight, a brilliant fight under any kind of conditions. But I think, like, you know, one of the kind of discerning notes about post-lockdown boxing is, you know, the competitive nature of some of the fights. That looked like it was going to be competitive on paper, and it was just brilliant. It completely went above and beyond anybody's wildest dreams or expectations. And it was a brilliant fight. That's the type of fight that we could easily see a second or a third fight down the line. And that's what boxing needs. You know, that fight would have made waves. I mean, obviously I don't live in America, but that would have made waves across the board. It would have, I'm sure, made, you know, the sports center and things like that, because all you need is 45 seconds where you just show the chaos and people falling and getting up and getting laid out and getting up again and scoring knockdowns. So it was a brilliant fight. And I think it's difficult because I don't really know where either one are going to go next. We could just do the rematch next because all the belts are tied up. So, you know, why not do the rematch again, or do the fight again next? I think everybody would want to see it. Obviously, we have to wait and see how, you know, both of them rest up and recover from that. But something, you know, March, April time next year would be fantastic. I'd love to see that fight again.
Another fight that was on the card was Guido Vianello. He ended up getting the draw with eBay. He got a very, very bad cut across his eye, and that's the first fight he hasn't won. Do you think that that's going to be another, you know, rematch soon? And how do you see it going if it is? And what did you think of his performance, really?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're dealing with a cut, you don't really know how deep is the cut. How many stitches does he need? How long is that going to keep him out of sparring for? Obviously, Guido is based in Vegas, so, you know, sparring's not really a problem for him. I haven't spoke to Kevin Barry, obviously trains him in a little while, about his plans, about whether or not he's going to go home. I would imagine that Guido will probably go to Italy and recover for a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't a good performance. I felt like Kingsley EBay won the fight. Guido is he's a work in progress. He went over to Kevin Barry from Abel Sanchez, completely different style of fighting. Abel Sanchez wanted him to be, you know, essentially Abel Sanchez coaches fighters to be very offensive and very attacking, whereas I know Kevin Barry had spoken to him about using his size, and, you know, Guido is a big guy and kind of getting him to box behind his jab. I think they were kind of looking at like modeling him like a sort of Klitschko type fighter, or using that type of that heavyweight prototype of being really big and staying behind your jab. But, you know, again, it's similar to Josh Buatsi. It's very early in Guido's career, and, you know, you can learn from these fights, but it's not just a case of, oh, well, I got through that, I'll learn for the next one. What went wrong in that fight? What was wrong with your preparation? How do you need to change that moving forward? I think that they'll probably want to right the wrong and address it and you know, get rid of all doubt. But, you know, as and when that's going to be based on the cut and COVID and everything else, who knows? But yeah, not a good performance from Guido. Got out of it with his unbeaten record still intact, barely, but still. And, you know, similar to Josh Buatsi, it is always easier to think about these things on the back of a win or a draw in that instance, as opposed to a loss, which can obviously be devastating at that point of your career.
Rob, I just want to move on to boxing that's happening on the weekend. I want to talk about one man. First of all, talking about the Frank Warren show that's happening on BT Sport this weekend. A name that seems to be popping up on social media quite a lot and calling out fighters is Liam Williams. He's fighting this weekend, going to be the main attraction, putting his British title on the line against Andrew Robinson, who's been around for a long time, 36 years old. People are going to expect Liam to win that, obviously. But what do you make of this approach in the lockdown? You know, he's come out, he's had a go at Chris Eubank Jr., then he's had a go at Andrade, and then it just seems that anyone in that category, middleweight or even a little bit lower or above, he's after him. What do you make of this new approach from Liam Williams?
I think it's great. You know, why not? He's a fighter and he's absolutely mental. So, you know, that's just the way he is. I don't know Liam Williams at all. I don't think I've ever even interviewed him, but he's just an angry man from the looks of things, and everybody who I've spoken to about him says exactly the same thing. Very intense, and, you know, I don't mind it. You know, if you're he wants a fight. You know, he's desperate to get a fight. You know, I see a tweet that he put out today, or I think Frank's Twitter account put out about, you know, Andrade says that he's the most avoided man in the sport. Well, I'm chasing Andrade down, and you could tell he would fight Andrade in the back of a car park in Sheffield for 20 quid, let alone fighting for the world title. So, you know, I like it. I like it a lot, and I think he's been really, really impressive under Dominic Ingle. Really impressive. You know, he destroyed Alantes Fox, who is a very capable fighter. He's big, he's awkward, rangy, and he just went to work on him and took him out. You know, I expect a very, very clinical, swift performance this weekend from Liam Williams. He doesn't play with his food. He's not interested in going rounds. He wants to get in there. He wants to hurt you and take you out. And I think that Liam Williams is the dark horse at 160 pounds. I think that he is, you know, an intense fighter and a difficult night's work for anybody. You know, whether that's Eubank Jr., whether that's Jamal Charlo, you know, who knows what's going on with Canelo at the minute. He's not going to box at 160 in his next fight, whenever that is. You know, we're waiting to hear what happens with him in the zone. But I think Liam Williams is a real handful. He's a real problem at 160 pounds. I think this weekend is just a tick over fight for him, a keep busy fight while he waits for the WBO mandatory against Demetrius Andrade. And I think he wins that fight. I think he beats Demetrius Andrade, and I think he beats him quite well. I think Demetrius Andrade coming through at 154 pounds, that talent that he was back then, he had the time out of the ring, and he's not really taken great fights even at 160 pounds since he's moved up. I don't think he's fulfilled the potential that he had as a 154 pounder coming through. And I think Liam Williams is just the wrong type of fighter to have at that point of your career. I think Andrade is kind of rightfully, you know, looking for the big fights and looking for the big paydays. But if they're not out there and you have to deal with a mandatory like Liam Williams, you got to be switched on for that fight, because if you're not, he will take you out. And I do feel that Andrade now in his game has enough holes for somebody like Liam Williams to exploit. I do really believe that.
And I'm with you with that. I think Liam Williams gets overlooked because he maybe not got that persona. He's got this ruthless sort of facial look that people just look at him, I think, and they probably don't know enough about him, which is probably the truth. They probably not watched enough of his fights, so they don't know much about him. But yeah, I think he's very much a person that you can't sort of look down on. He is going to cause havoc in that division. But another fighter on that card I want to talk to you about, and just a quick opinion from yourself. Prospects come through boxing a lot, and then you see a lot fail, when they step up. One name that keeps getting mentioned is Dennis McCann, a fighter who's still to step up. He's still very young in his professional career. But what do you make of him so far?
Yeah, I mean, he's done everything and more that you would expect or ask from him at this stage of his career. He is still very much a baby. I think boxing fans in general, but particularly British boxing fans, and I can include myself in that, have a habit of banging the drum very loud and very early for our prospects. It's not to say that, Dennis McCann won't go on to achieve great things in the sport, but it seems like anybody who can throw a corkscrew uppercut is the new Naz. Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily as clear cut as that. But, you have to look at what he's done so far as professional and just be very, very impressed. You can't be anything other than that. I know the Brett Fido performance had people salivating. Brett Fido knows his way around the ring, doesn't get stopped very often. And the shot that took him out was an absolute peach. But he is still very young. He does still need to develop. I know he's getting a lot of good sparring at the minute. He's been down to Ben Davison's gym, sparring with the likes of Lee McGregor. And so, yeah, I mean, everybody who I speak to tells me that he's going to be a future world champion, multiple weight this and multiple weight that. But he's had like a handful of fights and he's 18, 19. He's with, in my opinion, the best promoter to bring young talent through in Frank Warren. I think Frank is exceptional at matching his fighters with the right fights at the right time. So, he's got that in his favour, and he certainly has a lot of natural ability and a lot of natural talent. But, yeah, it's very, very soon to be kind of thinking really about world titles or anything like that. But you can't, not be impressed or very, very impressed with what he's done so far.
I want to get a quick prediction from you. On the weekend, Nathan Gorman returns. He's fighting Richard Lartey. Their both last fights were losses against Daniel Dubois. So what is your prediction for that fight on Saturday?
Well, I mean, the Richard Lartey Daniel Dubois fight was a really fun fight, from what I remember. I remember there's that clip that always goes around on social media of them both swinging for the fences and kind of windmilling at each other. I don't think we'll necessarily see that from Nathan Gorman, but it is, again, I haven't seen an awful lot of Richard Lartey out of apart from 4 rounds or whatever it was that he boxed Daniel Dubois. Nathan Gorman, it's an important fight for him. He needs to come back. I think Lartey, from what we saw in that Dubois fight, will give him rounds. I think that's what he needs. Been out of the ring for a long time. Obviously, his family situation has changed since then, so it's almost like a sort of a new career, as it were. He doesn't, I think that sometimes an unbeaten record for a prospect can weigh a bit heavy for him. As soon as he turned over, everybody was just talking about the Dubois fight after he'd had 1 or 2 or 3 fights. Whereas, there's nothing wrong with that. It's always good to have that in the background to build towards, but it felt like he was always under pressure. When are you going to fight Dubois? Are you going to beat Dubois? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Now that's kind of been taken off him. I'm really interested to see how he develops and how he kind of goes about his career, because he doesn't have that now. He can kind of focus on what he's doing. He can maybe go under the radar. I think Lartey, again, not massively familiar with him, but from what we've seen in his fight against Dubois, I think, if Gorman can go in there and be nice and clean, nice and clinical, and win every round and potentially take a couple on the way, I think that would be good for him. the Dubois fight was so heavily hyped, and he didn't really turn up. You know, he from the opening bell, he was right under the caution, and it was a bit of a nothing performance. So he does need to get back in there and just get the rounds under his belt. But I do think Nathan Gorman is very, very talented, and I think that loss to Dubois, that stage of his career, could in the long run work out in his favor. Whether he's ever going to be big enough or, you know, good enough even to challenge the upper echelons at heavyweight, I don't know. But I think if he can come through against Latte, get some good rounds under his belt, competitive rounds, it will set him up for a good 2021.
Rob, just final question. Just about some boxing news I broke earlier this week. Deontay Wilder's parted with his trainer, Mark Breland. There was, with myself, I know there was sort of rumours, there was murmurs in about July, August time about this happening. The news officially broke out the other day. What do you make of this? Because I know a lot of people are saying that Mark Breland threw the towel in against Tyson Fury, but do we know if there's anything else behind it? Has there been anything else behind it, or do you solely think that might have just been the reason that Wilder's got rid of it?
I mean, I don't know. It's difficult to speculate. I'm not really in the know at all with regards to Deontay Wilder's camp. I think, you know, given the type of talk that we were hearing at the early start of the year about kind of the towel going in, and we've heard him say in the past that, you know, he's an on his shield fighter and he doesn't want the towel to come in. I get that, I understand that, but Mark Breland, you know, he's been around the block, one of the greatest amateur fighters of any country, but certainly to come out of America. I don't really know, and it's difficult to comment on it because I don't know the ins and outs of the situation. I think Mark Breland, what he did with Deontay Wilder, you know, the improvement that we saw with Deontay Wilder's jab. You're never going to make Deontay Wilder into a heavyweight Pernell Whitaker. It's not going to happen. Yeah. But what I think that Breland, along with Jay Diaz and the other guys involved in the camp, were able to kind of get him to focus on what he was good at, which was setting up that right hand. And, you know, you can't just wing away with it. So blind him with the jab, which is what we've seen in some of his fights, you know, flicking that jab out, well, not even flicking it out, but spearing the jab out and working behind that was obviously something that we've seen progress and develop throughout his career. I don't know how much he'll miss him. I don't know how involved he is with the day-to-day. Jay Diaz is, you know, always been a very, very nice guy. And every time I've spoken to him, he's always kind of, he seems like like all trainers should, seems to have like Deontay's best interest at heart. They've been together for an awful long time. They've been through it all together, from the small hall shows to the big glitzy pay-per-views. So, you know, you would think that even though Mark Breland is gone, that he still does have Jay Diaz and somebody in his camp who will make the right calls to look after him. But I mean, you go back to the fight in February, the Wilder Fury 2 rematch. Jay Diaz, you know, some of the corner instructions he was giving to him, it was literally what we've spoken about, in a sense of like, okay, yeah, back him up and land the right hand, back him up, throw the right hand. Tyson Fury is a generational talent. You're not going to just beat somebody by backing him up and throwing the right hand. It's not going to happen. So yeah, it's an interesting one. There's talk of Malik Scott. I know Mayweather's thrown his name in there, but he'll throw his name to anything as long as there's a story involved. I think maybe somebody like a Buddy McGirt might be a good move for him. But I think at this point of Deontay Wilder's career, and kind of looking at him and his skill set, which is limited but very dangerous, you're not going to change him too much. He's had 40 odd fights, or 43 fights, or whatever it is. He's in his mid 30s now. So you're not going to change him too much. I think for him, the biggest thing on the back of that first that Fury rematch is going to be mentally. You know, how does he approach that mentally? You know, he's saying all the right things, but you know, you don't really know until you get into the ring on fight night. And I think that's going to be the biggest change and the biggest obstacle for him going into the fight. Apart from the 6'9" switch hitting 270-pound heavyweight in the other corner, that'll be a bit of a problem as well. But yeah, no, I don't really know. I'm actually due to try and catch up with my man Shelley Finkel soon. Been trying to get an interview with him since February. I've been trying. So we hope to hear more soon.
Rob, it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for coming on. I know you're a busy man. You are a very busy man, but you've taken out a good portion of your day, or a good portion of your couple of hours to give us time. So I appreciate that. Guys, just make sure you go onto the Boxing Social YouTube channel. They've got a great podcast they do fortnightly. They've had Joshua Buatsi, Fabio Wardi on recently. I'm not sure, who have you got on or are you leaving it a surprise? Ah, I thought so.
I haven't actually got a
It
guest.
was an exclusive.
But yeah, Boxing Social, give that a shout. They interview regularly, daily. So check them out. Rob, top man, I appreciate that so much, mate.
No problem at all. As I said at the start of it, anything that I can do to repay the faith that you showed at me in the very beginning, as always, it's a pleasure to do so. Ali, first time I've met you, also now a friend for life. Anybody who's a friend of Oun's is a friend of mine. So anything that you guys need, as always, just give me a shout. But no, thanks very much for having me on. Hopefully I didn't bore everybody with my incessant rambling. That's why I stay off camera, by the way. But yeah, thanks very much for stopping by, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Cool.
We'll have you on every week with that. Thank you.
Rob, you're a star. Cheers, mate.
Thank you.
Speak to you soon. Great to be joined by Rob there. Now we're going to look back at when I caught up with 32 Red's John Evans. We discussed the Dubois-Joyce fight before the actual fight date announcement was made. And we look ahead to the fights that are promised in 2021. I just couldn't believe it because there was no crowd reaction. It was as if like you were in shock, like no, this hasn't just happened. It was totally bizarre. But I think that was the best fight, I think, from lockdown.
It was surreal, wasn't it? It was just the noises, and because you could hear the microphones were positioned right over the ropes, everything was so raw, wasn't it? And two big heavyweights like that, and the spectacular knockout, the bang on the canvas, it was pretty. It sticks in your mind, and Dillian's got to get over that because that, as vivid an image as that is for us, can you imagine how vivid it is for Dillian Whyte?
Yeah, he was ready to go again straight away. He was like, "When's the rematch? I want it now."
Would you like getting in a ring with Mr. Povetkin after 3 or 4 months after that happening?
No chance.
No, he's out on his own, Dillian. I think that's why a lot of people like him. I know he gets lots of stick for the fights he's avoided, or chosen not to take, should I say, rather than avoided, because I think he would actually fight anybody. But the route he's taken has attracted some criticism because he's turned down final eliminators and things. But I've got a big soft spot for him just purely because he's so willing to do things like this. Him and Derek Chisora are very similar to me. They remind me of the crazy heavyweights that used to fight him in the 1980s, where very unpredictable, drop of a hat, anything could happen. And I've got a big soft spot for Dillian, but I do think he's up against it purely because of the mental demons from that first one.
Yeah, because I think if it wasn't for that, most people, and for the first one, they were thinking Dillian Whyte was going to come out on top on that. And I think if it was, the same would be said, but it is going to take, that's now a huge, that could happen at any moment. He's going to be thinking about that the whole way through, regardless of whether he's actually winning it, because he was winning the first one. And regardless of that, it could literally change at any moment.
Exactly, yeah. It's always going to be in the back of his mind. And will that, because Dillian's an aggressive guy, a naturally aggressive guy, I don't think it'll change his attitude and his outlook. But if it does, and if he does have safety first in the back of his mind, Dillian Whyte would be half the fighter that he is. So he's also got to counter against that. So Dillian's in a real tough position. Does he stick with what's made him successful and be aggressive and come out heavy-handed and gave him success against Povetkin in the first few rounds? Or does he twist and try something different, something totally alien to him, and end up getting himself in a mess? I think the problems are more mental than physical for Dillian. Although Povetkin did okay in the first fight, I thought the commentary let him down a little bit. I think he was doing better than Sky gave him credit for. But Dillian was on top. But how does he approach it?
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. Another fight that may happen, there's been talk that it's happening, then we've not got a date, is Daniel Dubois, Joe Joyce. So a nice British fight. There is, I think Frank was saying they wanted to wait for crowds, which I guess they were hoping for towards the end of the year. Probably not going to happen with crowds now. But I saw today on Twitter that Frank and Joe Joyce's manager, Sam Jones, were having a bit of back and forth, and they're saying that I think the fight, he's got some news that maybe the fight is going to happen. How do you see that one going?
This is a big fight. I'm as confident can be that Daniel Dubois is the next great heavyweight. I've seen nothing, not a single thing which makes me question that. I've been speaking to Daniel since before his debut for 32 Red. And what are we now? We're nearly 4 years down the line. He hasn't changed. He's the same person he was when he was a 19-year-old. He's got no interest in doing interviews. He's got no interest in hype. He's got no interest in having a camera in his face or a microphone under his nose. He's not interested. All he wants to do is become the heavyweight champion of the world. That's it. That's all well and good if you've not got the skills, but he has got the skills. And I think he's shown everything. He's got the jab, he's got the temperament, he's got the power. We've seen him, he's clearly got no worries about his chin. He's more than willing to stand in and trade shots with people. If there'd been any little worries in the gym, maybe he wouldn't be so confident in trading punches with these big heavyweights, but he is. I don't see how Joyce can really beat him. To be honest, I'm going to go for a pretty conclusive Dubois win. I think it might be one of those breakout moments where everybody realises we've got a new superstar in our hands.
And do you think it'll be via knockout, or do you think it will go the distance? Because Joe Joyce has such a great amateur career. He's got the experience.
Such a great amateur career and great experience, but he gets hit with right hands. And you can't get hit by right hands from Daniel Dubois. You just can't. I spoke to Daniel about this, and he said if Joe lets me hit me with those right hands, he said it'll go in one round. Wow. So obviously Joe's going to come correct. He's not going to be as easy to hit, but he's going to get hit. I just think, and it's no knock against Joe, who's a good lad and an exciting guy, and his record is better than Daniel's. But I just think Daniel's one of those strange talents, like a prodigy that comes along every so often. I think he's really going to look the part.
Well, hopefully it will actually happen soon, hopefully this year, because it would be a great fight when it happens.
Would you like it to happen behind closed doors, or do you think that's one that deserves 20,000 people to see it?
It is a shame if it happens behind closed doors. It is a shame, but the way that we're going, I just can't see when there's going to be like full crowds. That could be like another year off. We've not got any crowds yet, so let alone full crowds. I just can't see it. And the problem is, you just don't want all these amazing fights all it will take is for them to have fights with the people, and then something happens so that fight then doesn't happen. So I'd rather it happen behind closed doors than not at all. So
you know what would look even sadder than being behind closed doors? Having 5,000 people in the O2 Arena because
that's true, actually. Yeah, that's true.
That.
I know.
You'd be going around now with your card, showing the round number to the people up on row Z in the O2 Arena.
Yeah, like one person at a time. Well, just to add to 2020 as a crazy year, there has been loads of crazy fights announced, scheduled, potentially happening. So I just want to talk to you first about Manny Pacquiao taking on Conor McGregor. They've both apparently said, yes, they've agreed to it and this is going to happen. What's your thoughts on that?
Let's do it. Let's do it. Why not? Why not? Manny's... I'm not one of these people that gets all high and mighty about these type of fights. Everybody's got to earn money. Conor and Manny are two of the biggest names in combat sports. I'd watch it. We all know exactly what would happen, unless there'd been a deal done beforehand, or Manny decided to do a Floyd Mayweather and carry him.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's just all about money? Do you think that's why they're doing it?
Yeah, of course. Conor's a clever guy, and Conor watches boxing, and he's been in the ring with Floyd. He'll know full well that Floyd Mayweather carried him. And he'll know that Manny Pacquiao is a completely different animal. Manny Pacquiao isn't going to play games. And he'll know he can't beat him. But money talks, doesn't it? If Manny can earn a few extra £1 million to help the people in the Philippines, because he seems to give most of his money away, then fair play, let them get on with it. We're not going to see Manny in a super fight, are we? So let's just have an event and try and get some eyes back on combat sports. I'm not precious about things like that.
Do you think that boxers are going to do it vice versa? So like they'll go to the MMA side, or do you think that it's probably easier for the likes of Conor McGregor to come across to boxing?
I can guarantee you any boxer with anything about them will never do it. They can't win.
Mm.
Everybody always says, "Oh, it only takes one punch." You won't land one punch.
Yeah.
I spent 8 years grappling. I used to grapple every day for 8 years. Anyone worth their salt would never in a million years trade punches with a boxer if you can just put them on the back and beat them.
Mm.
So they would be crazy to, absolutely crazy to.
Well, another fight that's...
Look, the few times it's happened, Ali, look at like an all-time great like James Toney.
Mm.
Just got humiliated by Randy Couture.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to come out of it well, looking good. You know, at least if the boxing side, Conor McGregor didn't come out of it looking bad. You know, they
came out of it looking great.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
so I guess it is different. Another one of the crazy
on your back, somebody on top of you.
Well, we've got Floyd Mayweather and Logan Paul. There's talk of that happening. The funniest thing I've seen about this is that, I mean, I think that's, again, a foregone conclusion about who is going to win. But there's talk now that KSI is saying, well, why would he fight him? Because KSI was the one that won. So that, there's a bit of debate about that. But I think regardless, I mean, is that just a money spinner for Floyd Mayweather?
Yeah, that's just a money spinner, isn't it? But, we talked earlier about Josh Taylor taking care of his mandatory guy in ruthless fashion. Do you remember the last exhibition Floyd had where he fought the Japanese guy?
Yes.
The kickboxer, and they paid him millions of pounds. And he just completely humiliated the guy in less than a round.
Yeah. Do you see that happening again?
Floyd, yeah, maybe Floyd didn't like the criticism he got for going 10 rounds with Conor, and he's decided to just get rid of these guys. Have you seen the latest news though about KSI calling out Mike Tyson?
I actually saw Mike Tyson's reaction. I think, yeah, I did. It's I mean, that's like a death wish, I'd say. That one.
That's isn't it?
Crazy. But then Mike's obviously talking about coming back out of retirement. I mean, I haven't actually heard much about that in the last sort of few weeks. It's died down a little bit. But what do you think about all these sort of ex-fighters coming back out of retirement when they're like late 50s?
Yeah, it's so sad, isn't it? I think it's the same for someone like Mike or somebody like Roy Jones who've achieved everything you could possibly dream of accomplishing. I think it's exactly the same for someone like that as it is for a guy who's been a journeyman fighting 4-rounders. Is that not wanting to think that you're physically not capable of doing it anymore, not wanting to let go of that life as a professional, for bragging rights of saying you're a professional athlete, and just that feeling it must give you. I imagine it must be very, very difficult to let that go and go to a normal life. And I suppose for any athlete, be it a boxer, a mixed martial arts guy, a footballer, letting go must be the most difficult thing. It just happens that combat athletes, boxers, MMA guys, they're in such a dangerous position, aren't they? It's not as if they can start playing amateur football on a Saturday afternoon at a lower level. If you're boxing, you're boxing them. There's a good chance you're going to get hurt. I think that's why we've got to look after them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, looking ahead to 2021, just before we finish, I just want to know what fights you want to see in the new year. Hopefully when things return back to normal and there's crowds, what are the fights that you really want to see next year?
I think we've got to see Joshua Fury. We've got to. Britain, I can't remember him having the top 2 heavyweights in the world in my lifetime, although I'm only 21. So I can't remember that happening. And when will it ever happen again?
Yeah.
And Wembley Stadium for Joshua Fury, forget going to Saudi Arabia. If that fight can't happen in London, I think it would be disgusting. There's enough money there.
It is a shame, isn't it, if it doesn't?
How much money do you need? If they're going to get tens of millions from the gate, the pay-per-view will be ridiculous. Let's get that done in London. Going back to the Charlos, I think it's time for a Charlo to take on Golovkin. I think we're ready for a passing of the torch. We need some new middleweight blood coming through. Golovkin, what a guy he's been. I think he was everybody's favourite fighter at one point, but he's just on the way. I think the time's right for Charlo to go over Golovkin. And I'm still Chocolatito's biggest fan, so I would love to see Chocolatito and Estrada fight again. That's one of the greatest fights I've ever seen. It happened too long ago now. It's time for those two to get a rematch done. So there's 3 for you.
They're good ones. Well, hopefully they'll happen. John, thank you so much for joining us on Sportology TV. It's been great speaking to you.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed that episode of Under the Lights. A lot to discuss, a lot going on, and a lot to look forward to. We have lots more coming up, lots more shows planned, so make sure you stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed. Leave some comments so we know your opinions, and we'll see you next time.